Welcome and welcome back. I know several of you have been asking for it as I've been going through the different areas, so today is the day I am going to be ranking all of the regions. Now, I am going to have these criteria here while I'm kind of thinking about where I want to rate them, rather than talk you through it. Instead, I think what we should do is I'm just going to walk you through kind of my thoughts with Misthalin and Karamja, so you can see kind of how I go about it. On the left, we've got the general kind of gear setup, what you can expect, you know, maybe early, mid in this area. And then on the right, you'll have just kind of shorthand for whatever is best in slot for that region. Now, the starter regions, they have okay coverage. Mage is definitely the weakest in both just kind of in general and the best in slot. It really doesn't offer much, but you've got okay coverage for the other two combat styles. You do actually pick up a couple of things that are going to be best in slot most likely throughout the entire league. There are a lot of places that you can combine these with to get some additional gear. I'm not necessarily going to focus that much on the combos. I personally prefer when a region is more enclosed, has better offerings than what you get in the starter area, but it is just the starter area. We may get some extra pickups from like the tormented demons, the armored zombies, you know, so there's a little bit of room for growth in here, but again, these are for free, so it's not that big of a deal. And actually what I find really interesting is there's a decent spread for the skills. So I've kind of done like a quick notation here, and actually before I kind of dive into this, I'll put a couple of references. Again, I'm not going to go super into detail. If you want to see what an area has to offer, I have a bunch of those guides that I'll link right up here if you want to go and see that playlist. But just as kind of like a shorthand for a couple of the things that I think are particularly strong in this area, you're going to have access to Scurious. That is going to mean all of your combat skills are very, very easy to train. The mods have already talked about nerfing Soul Wars, so I'm totally expecting that Soul Wars is not going to be the place to get yourself combat XP. You've got the Brimhaven agility course, and then you're picking up Karambans, very good for fishing. Cooking, it is good. You just have to get the fish first, and that does take time, so I wouldn't necessarily say it's the fastest cooking wise. And then on Hunter, you know, you get some really good options for Hunter. I think it's really strong in this area. For the task distribution, you can see the number of tasks between these two areas, where they fall, going from easy all the way up to master. And the starting areas are definitely centered more around that early mid game. There are a couple of late game things, and in terms of like the time consuming tasks, I'm looking at getting a bunch of Inferno KC, maybe the combat achievements as well, so you can spend quite a bit of time here. Sire is not the fastest thing to kill. If they end up doing the 300 KC task again, I mean, it's gonna take a little while. And then the Gout Tuber. Oh man, I hope they fix it for this league, dude. They have not buffed the drop rate on this, and they're supposed to. I'm pretty sure they've said they're going to, so this may not actually be that long of an endeavor. But man, not just for the diary, but also as a task requirement, trying to get one of these things in leagues feels painful, all right? So all of that together, I think the starting areas, they fall right in the center. And this isn't just because you get it for free or it's the first thing on this list. I genuinely think it is B tier for both of these put together. It has some okay gear stuff. It has some okay spread for skills. The tasks are pretty decent, right? So that's where I'm putting it. Now for the desert, again, here's just kind of like the quick breakdown of what all you have available to you. Mage early on is kind of all you're getting. There's a couple of little things that you're picking up for melee, but you are not taking the desert for early mid-game gear. You are pretty much exclusively taking it for that late game best in slot, which it does have best in slot range. We already know that the Echo weapon is going to be something range related as well, so I've got that marked in here. Mage is also going to be pretty good. You're picking up Ancients by taking the desert, which are going to benefit a lot from Virtus robes. Plus, you're also getting a Shadow, and while the Shadow doesn't get quite as much of a buff as Ancient Magics do when using Virtus robes, these are still going to serve you really well in leagues. So I think if you're taking the desert, you're doing really well on your range and your mage setup late game. Melee leaves some space to be desired there, you know, like you do pick up a couple of weapons, but it's nothing crazy. Synergy wise, I've got a couple of things listed out here. Definitely want to shout out Asgarnia as a combo, just because if you want to make your Masories top tier, it's got to get combined with Armadil. The other thing I want to keep in mind with the desert, and this doesn't really fit anywhere, but you get the statue of Elidinus. It's going to allow you to heal your stats. And as I said a number of times in the area videos, healing your stats back up in leagues is kind of a pain in the butt. It's really difficult to build out the top end house pool because you have to take Tirannwn in order to get the anti-venoms for it. So unless you're doing that, the only other options that you really have are the Ferox Enclave in the wild and this statue in the desert. It is nice to have just some sort of like quick stat reset, especially if they do last recall. You're able to like kill a boss, teleport to this statue, heal your stats, last recall back. It makes boss farming way, way easier. On the skill side of things, you can see it still has a pretty good spread. The skills that you're going to be training in the desert, you can train them really well. A lot of thieving options. You are going to get a gem stall, so you're going to have that for crafting. You also get access to making darts. Now, you can attach feathers to dart tips outside of the desert, but if you want to make the actual dart tips, so something like steel darts, adamant darts, whatever, you have to have the desert so you can get access to tourist trap. So that is definitely one strength of the desert. It's kind of a pain in the butt to train fletching in general, so something to keep in mind. Plus, you also get a lot of skilling minigames. Now, you may notice that rune crafting, I don't rate that highly, and that's because while you do get Guardians of the Rift, you can only use rune altars that you actually have access to, given the regions that you've taken. So it's not that strong by itself, especially if the desert is, say, like your first region. Now, once you get a couple more regions, you'll get access to a couple more ruin altars that you can use, so the XP will be better. But just initially, it's not the best. It's probably still going to be better for you than like going to an altar and using essence and then going to a bank and then back, especially in the early game. In the late game, maybe not so much, because you'll have things like last recall, assuming that they do that this year. Now, in terms of the task distribution, it is still somewhat towards the early game, but most of it falls into like the mid-game time frame. You know, you do have Tombs of a Masket, which does pick up some elite and master tasks here, but there's actually not that many that you have to concern yourself with. You can definitely do a lot of the minigame stuff and get a lot of points pretty early on. It's not necessarily my favorite region task-wise, but it's pretty close. It's like pretty up there. I wouldn't necessarily take the desert first, but you certainly can, and I think you'll be able to do just fine. Time-wise, Tombs of a Masket definitely has some of the longer grinds that you'd be looking towards. Not necessarily a bad thing, because you're probably going to want the raid gear anyway, but just keep that in mind. You know, you got to do certain levels, like completing a 500 raid can be pretty difficult, take you some time. Getting certain numbers of KC, like completing 25, 50 raids, whatever that may look like, right? You've also got looting the chest for the Pharaoh Scepter, so there'll probably be a task associated to the Pharaoh Scepter specifically, and then they'll also have some tasks for the different level rooms. So like looting 250 of the floor 8 in the pyramid, I think was a task last year. So just kind of the same deal with Squirk Juice. Normally there's a task for turning in a certain amount, like turning in 100 of the summer squirt juice or what have you. This one isn't necessarily that time consuming, especially if you're doing it early in the league. Once you get later into the league and there's not a billion people just like running through Sorcerer's Garden, it becomes a little bit more time consuming. You're probably going to end up spending 2 or 3 times as long trying to do it. So when I think about all of this stuff together, the desert definitely has some good best in slot gear. It doesn't have great coverage for every style. The skills that it can train are good, but again, it doesn't cover that many skills. So I have a hard time going above A for the desert. That's why I put it in here. There's probably an argument to be had that it could be S. I don't think it's quite there. I think we'll see some better options. Speaking of better options, Morytania. Oh boy, Morytania has a lot of gear. And while I do place the Barrow's gear kind of over here in that best in slot region, you can actually access them very early. So you get a couple of mage upgrades early. I put the air staff here because that's likely what you're going to be using as you go and do barrows. You can do barrows so early. It is easy content. So a lot of the core gear that you get in this region, you are going to get that massive spike from barrows gear almost immediately. You basically open up Morytania and you are going to get that. Coupled with the fact that you're also getting the Slayer Mask, that is an immediate % boost to all of your damage. You are able to imbue it through something like Soul Wars. You can also buy imbue points if you end up going to the Nightmare Zone. You can buy them with GP. So you are going to be able to upgrade that Black Mask. It's not only going to be useful for melee, you're going to get it for range and mage as well. So just immediately more damage as soon as you open up Morytania. Great armor upgrades, I think, especially in that mid-game bracket. It's not necessarily definitely the best late game for like the mage and the range setup. The melee setup, while it's not technically best in slot, that would be something like Torva, which you'd end up needing to take Asgarnia for. But the Inquisitor armor, it gives a lot of strength bonus. So I actually think as a melee region, you could take Morytania and just be totally fine. You get the Inquisitor setup, you get Justiciar if you want something tanky, you've got that Barrows gear. Some of it's going to be fun to use just by itself, but it can also serve as kind of like that mid-game jumping point for you. So a lot of good stuff, a lot of good coverage here, and there's not a lot of other regions you have to pick up. Pretty much all of this is going to be useful just within Morytania. Bonus points if you get Asgarnia to upgrade the Defender to be able to use that drop from the raid. And again, like bonus points if you get Kandarin, because then you get access to the necklace upgrade from Araxor. But you definitely don't have to do that. On the skill side, it has a decent coverage, I would say, for skills. Obviously, you're getting a huge buff to Slayer, not just from the Black Mask, but you're also getting a ton of Slayer creatures in this area. You are also getting a pretty big boost to rune crafting as well. You get Dayal Essence if you want to use that. You're getting access to Blood Ruins. You get Fire Making Prayer, that kind of stuff from the Shade Remains. You'll also have access to the Ectofunctus. Ectofuntus? I don't know. It's one of those. And that's also a great prayer option, especially early on. You just take an inventory of Dragon Bones or something over there, and you'll pretty much immediately get to 43 prayer. So that one's quite good. And I also wanted to call out Temple Trekking. You can get XP tomes as a reward. These are the skills that they're used in. I don't necessarily think that that's the best way to get yourself to 99 in any one of these skills, but it does give you another avenue that you can explore to kind of just maybe get some of those early or mid levels before you're like halfway to 99 when it starts to really slow down. And for the task distribution, I actually think Morytania, it's now kind of moved more towards that mid to late game, but it's not so heavily weighted into the late game where you have to avoid taking Morytania first. I still think it serves best as like a second region choice. You can take it early. There is just barely enough that you can do, I think, that you're able to kind of skirt by if this is your first region choice. You won't feel too bad about it. And actually, in terms of kind of like the longer tasks, you've got Theater of Blood, of course, with the raid. The Nightmare also can be a little bit time consuming. It's just kind of like a long kill. There's a couple of mechanics in there that are going to slow you down a little. And also the Hallowed Sepulchre, a little bit unfortunate that there'll be a task associated probably to the Ring of Endurance. It's not very useful. So can take you a little bit of time running through there. Every one of those runs, even though it's league, is still going to take you a couple of minutes. So all of these are probably like the heaviest in terms of the time commitment. Most people who are taking this region, they're doing it for melee. You're going to want to kill these bosses anyway. So I actually don't foresee these tasks being that much of a challenge for you. So I am placing Morytania as the first S tier region in this list. I really, really like Morytania. I think it is very good. It's got a very nice spread of gear, pretty decent spread for the skills. You've got a lot of options there. The task distribution, while you will spend a lot of time in the raid, probably a decent amount of time killing Nightmare as well. I don't think it's the worst thing. It's definitely one of the downsides, I would say, out of everything that this region has to offer, but it's not that big of a deal. Oh, and we've got the YouTube region. Look at that, the subscribe button. Who could have thought? You know, the subscribe region, it really brings a lot of value. I think given all of the content that comes through, I mean, really, you're looking at just great XP all around, all of the skills. I mean, the task distribution, just look at that. That thing looks like a W to me. I'm putting that thing up in S tier. I'm sorry, every other region, you just can't. You just can't compete with that thing. Look at the value that that brings. Oh, man, I feel like a bad ad every time I do that. Okay, where are we? Wilderness? The wilderness region. Okay, gear. It is not good. All right, I'll be real with you. The wilderness gear, you are not taking the wilderness for this unless they do something that allows you to use the revenant weapons outside of the wilderness. Then these become really good. Otherwise, it's kind of like mid-level gear for most of this stuff. It does offer a few best in slot. You get the best in slot magic cape. The shield is required for like the best in slot magic shield. Some of this stuff is good, but I mean, there's just not enough gear here for you to really like build out a setup. Mage is definitely the strongest, but it's going to be kind of a pain in the butt to get it. You could pick up like Elder Chaos robes early near the zombie pirates in that area. It's just not that good. It's not that good by itself. One thing that I do think is really beneficial here about the wilderness is the Ferox Enclave. Getting that pool, being able to heal your stats up, it is a pretty big deal. So if you're not taking the desert and you're not taking a region that has a stonemason, it's actually worth considering doing the wilderness, and especially when we look at the skill distribution here in a second. So with the skills, and I think a lot of people may disagree with me on this, I actually think the wilderness is one of the best skilling regions in the league. And this is because not only do you get access to things like black chins, which are going to be really good for range training, you've got some good kind of like AFK skilling opportunities, dark crafts for fishing, cooking. You got the chaos altar out there for prayer, the agility method, you got like the rogue's chest, things like that. So there's some good dedicated skilling related activities. But on top of that, you are looking at so many supply drops. The wilderness does nothing but print supplies and money. So I just grabbed a couple of the drop tables just so you can kind of see what I'm talking about. Revenants, which is where you're probably going to be spending a lot of your time, because if you're taking the wilderness, you're going to want the Revenant weapons. You can see here, you're getting a lot of noted bars, a lot of dragon hide, a lot of logs, even some planks just directly, some tree seeds, and a lot of the wilderness bosses as well. They have very similar style drop tables, like tons of gems, tons of dragon hide, even get some herbs in the mix there. And this is the same for just about everything that you kill in the wilderness. So when I say it's a good skilling region, especially for all of the production skills, if you've not played a league before, let me tell you, it is a pain in the butt to gather supplies. Yes, in the late game, if you're doing something like a raid, you'll typically build up a lot of supplies anyway, but those take a ton of time and a ton of prep to get there. And the wilderness is just quick, accessible. You can just pay your like entry GP, if they even make you pay it, to go into the revs and just start killing the revs. Like, you could take this as your first area and start doing that, and you will just get so many supplies. All of the logs, great for fletching. You can even use them for fire making. It's not my favorite to like manually burn the logs, but it's definitely not the slowest either. You're getting so much dragon hide, gems, things like that. You're able to get your crafting up. You actually have a lot of slayer options as well, the wilderness slayer cave, and just in general, I mean, because of the amount of supplies, you're able to basically train all of your skills using the stuff that you get in the wilderness. Not to mention, you'll kind of like slowly build up keys for the various chests as well, and those give a ton of supplies too. It is just, what did I say before? Money and supplies, money and supplies. I mean, I love the wilderness specifically for this reason. Like, yes, you can gather them. Yes, there may be relics that help you gather things faster, but it will never compete on the same level as what the wilderness can give you in like 5 seconds of going to the revs. It's crazy. It is so good for skilling. And I also think for the task distribution, it's a little bit deceptive actually, because most of the content in the wilderness isn't actually that hard to do during the leagues. You're not really having to worry so much about PKers. So most of the tasks that you have to deal with are just killing the bosses. And a lot of the bosses really aren't that difficult to kill. So while the distribution is definitely leaning more into the like mid and the late game, outside of something like the corporeal beast, you'll be able to blaze through a lot of these tasks, even the higher level ones, which ends up making the wilderness, I think, one of the better point regions as well. There's not like a crazy ton to do, so you're able to kind of like blitz through all these bosses, get all of the supplies, and then you're done with the region. Now, the corporeal beast is typically the slowest because you've got the spirit shields, which are still going to be crazy high drop rate. Even with the buff, it's still going to be like 1 in 1,000, 1 in 800, whatever, right? Like, it's still going to take you a while. And especially if you don't have a setup that's good at killing the corporeal beast, it's going to take you ages to get that. Plus the revenants. Now, you're still going to be spending a lot of time at the revenants anyway, but the weapons are still pretty rare. So one thing you can do to kind of help mitigate some of the time that you're going to spend there is make sure that you pick up slayer tasks from Crystalia to do the revenant tasks. That's going to increase the drop rates on top of what you get for leagues. And also make sure that you skull while you're out there. You're not going to lose your stuff. People will occasionally fight you over the rev spots, but even if you die, you keep everything, skulled or not. So make sure you're skulled up, because that is also going to increase your drop rates for the revenants. That can help you save some time here. So I put the wilderness at B, and I think it's a top B. I could almost be convinced to put it in the A tier just because the skilling side of it is so good. The tasks are really actually very easy to get through, so it's a great point region. The only thing that I think really hurts the wilderness is the fact that you don't get a lot of gear from it. So if you're looking for a gear region, the wilderness doesn't perform very well. But if you want something to support your other region choices and just give you a bunch of supplies, make sure that you can kind of finish up all of those skills, the wilderness actually performs very well. And I highly recommend the wilderness specifically for that reason. A lot of people ask me, what are some of the easier areas to do? I actually point at the wilderness. As annoying as it can be for people to kill you, since you don't lose your stuff, it gives so much supplies. I cannot over stress that, but Stop glazing the wilderness for a minute. Let's continue on with the tier list. The Fremennik region, the one that I typically hate on the second most. You know, it's fine, all right? You get, like, the gear isn't the best. It doesn't have particularly good coverage for any area. It definitely falls into that support tier, but it doesn't have bad stuff. You do pick up a couple of best in slot or close to best in slot things by taking this region. You've got, like, on the melee side, you get the melee helmet, you get a berserker ring. Rings are notoriously a pain in the butt to come across in leagues because they're almost exclusively locked to the Fremennik region. So by taking the Fremennik region, you're getting access to all of the base rings. On the range side, you can get Dragon Bolts from Vorkath, Dragon Bolts from Muspah as well, so that's a good source of those. The range shield isn't the best in slot, but it is second best. Very good. The backpack, again, not best in slot since Varlamore came and kind of took that from the Fremennik region, but it is still very good. Also saves your ammo. That can be really helpful, even with League relics, which some of them may help you save ammunition. If you double up the ammunition saving, you basically never use any of your ammo, so that can be really helpful. You don't have to go through and like farm a bunch of Dragon Bolts. And then on the mage side, while it doesn't have necessarily like a good mage weapon per se, again, it has some good supporting pieces. You get the Imbued Heart upgrade because you have to have Muspah in order to get that. You're going to get access to the mage ring, kind of like a nice little bonus. Wrath Ruins if you want to do something interesting with the standard spellbook. Plus, you're also going to pick up the lunar spells. Not really good combat wise, but there are some interesting skilling options when you're taking that. Skilling wise, you start to see a little bit less options in the Fremennik area. Hunter, you know, it does have a hunter area. I wouldn't use it, and especially if you take Varlamore, it's actually going to hurt you rather than help you, so bear that in mind. You do get a stonemason shop, so you're able to build a gilded altar. That's good for prayer. It does have the second highest rooftop course, so it is going to be a good place to train agility if you care to do that. Plus, you also pick up astral ruins, another way you can train rune crafting. But I think the three strongest pieces for the region are going to be blast furnace for smithing. One thing that is absolutely just so annoying in leagues is trying to smelt ore. You do not want to smelt ore in a standard furnace unless they give you a relic to buff it, and even if they do, it's probably not as good as blast furnace. So blast furnace, really strong for this region, especially if you've got just a ton of ore in the bank from other PVM content that you're doing. A lot of PVM content drops ore instead of bars, so it can be really helpful for that. Vorkath is a big resource dropper as well. I just put a couple of things in here. So you're gonna have like his bones for prayer. You're gonna be getting a pretty decent amount of crafting supplies. And also he's quite good for fletching. He can drop dart tips, which you can just attach feathers to. So you'll be getting a decent amount of like dragon dart tips, rune dart tips. They drop from there. He also does drop some logs, so you can use those for fletching as well. Pretty good all-around supply boss for you. And you are probably going to be killing him a lot if you take the Fremennik region, just because the visage drops still aren't that common from him. The other major, just like the biggest win for Fremennik, honestly, I could take all of this out and I think the Kingdom of Misthalin. It is so good. Leagues runs for 8 weeks. And yes, Misthalin only gathers resources once a day. But when you couple that with the league multiplier, it is like the best thing for herbs, the best thing for logs, the best thing for fish if you want to do that. I mean, really, anything that it can collect is really gonna help you out. So this is gonna give you just a nice, consistent spread of things. I think especially with the herbs. Herbs are kind of a pain in the butt to come by if they don't do some sort of relic that boosts farming. Because even the bosses that drop herbs, it still tends to be a little bit rare or the stacks aren't that big. So this is probably one of the best sources, if not the best source for herbs outside of something like a farming related relic, which makes herbs grow instantly or something like that. Task wise, I don't love the tasks here. They definitely lean more into that sort of late game area, and especially for some of the bosses, Vorkath and Duke are not the fastest to kill. Vorkath is definitely a little bit faster, but Duke, Succulus, because there is that like skilling thing right at the front of the boss, it takes a while. Even if melee is like your specific style, which is great for killing him, you still have to run from one side of the room to the other to like get the ingredients or whatever to wake him up. So unless they change something about that, it just means that the kills basically take you like 2 minutes at a minimum because you have to do the skilling stuff. So this one really sucks. And I mean, out of the two, I mean, I ended up skipping the Duke Succulus task and some of the Vorkath like visage tasks just because it was so time consuming. So you can probably tell I'm not that hyped by Fremennik. I'm putting it in a C tier. it definitely has its use cases. It can be a very strong support region. I don't think a lot of the tasks are kind of dependent on what the relics turn out to be. If they do a shop-related relic, then yeah, you can get just a ton of points from Fremennik pretty easily. But since they've already said that they're not going to do the same type of relics this year, I'm hesitant to give it any more benefit than that. So Fremennik, sorry, C tier. At least we kept you out of D tier. I don't think Fremennik is that bad. I do think it has enough use cases. It has enough value. Not quite bottom of the barrel. Next up, we have got Asgarnia. What a region, man. Asgarnia is so good. Look at the gear spread. I mean, if nothing else, the gear spread in Asgarnia is so good. You get Void pretty early on, and frankly, I mean, this can even carry you through like the mid and the late game if you ended up not spending a lot of time in God Wars. So like Void armor, pretty solid place to start. You do pick up a cannon as well, can help you with range or also just kind of like AFKing certain activities. And then of course you have God Wars, and God Wars has best in slot melee is required for best in slot range. Also has a couple of supporting pieces that are likely to be best in slot as well. Mage is the only thing that's lacking, and at least you're still picking up the Desert Treasure 2 robes. You still get the Staff of the Dead, so you do have just a little bit of mage gear as well. So this is just a super well-rounded region. A lot of best in slot. A lot of people are going to be picking up Asgarnia just for the synergy that it has with other raid regions. Got all of the combinations listed out here again, and I especially wanted to call out, I know some of you have pointed this out in the Asgarnia video, you get access to the max cape, which, yeah, maxing in leagues, not everybody's going to want to do it, but if you do end up maxing in leagues, this can give you access to some very helpful skill cape perks that you may not have in your regions. The two that stand out to me are the HP cape for the regen. You can do some fun builds with that, and also the ranging cape, which can help you save ammunition if you don't end up having an accumulator. So that's something to keep in mind. There are also some other cape perks that are likely going to be useful. If you have one that you particularly like, want to call out, definitely leave it in the comments because there's a lot of skill capes. On the skilling side, I do want to put a caveat next to the combat XP. Last year, Pest Control was probably the best combat XP in the game. They haven't specifically said that they're going to nerf Pest Control. I think they've only called out Soul Wars, but I do think that Pest Control is in danger of getting some type of XP nerf, so we may not see it be quite as strong in the combat skills and prayer as it was last year. If that ends up being the case, I'll definitely circle back and update this piece, but for now, this is what it's looking like for those skills. And actually, even if they nerf the XP, Pest Control is actually pretty good for herbs. I don't know if anybody ever goes and buys the herb packs from them, but definitely in leagues, like towards the end of the game when you have kind of like the max qualifiers or percent boosts or whatever in leagues, one game could be like 2 herb packs. It's actually really good because it only takes you like a minute and a half or 2 minutes to complete a Pest Control game. So super good source of herbs actually. You are also getting just a ton of mining options for you in the area. Mining Guild, Camdozel, you get the Star Mining Shop. I mean, there's quite a few things in here. You've also got a good construction method. You have to have Falador in order to start Mahogany Home contracts. You only get contracts for areas that you have. So this can be really helpful, especially if you don't want to go through and make a lot of planks. Maybe you don't have a lot of GP because you just don't have a good GP generating area like the wilderness. This can be really helpful in training up your construction. And there is also some supporting things for like thieving. You get the thieving cape, you get a thieving outfit, stuff like that, plus a farming patch. So there's a decent amount here for you skilling wise. On the task side, there are some easy medium tasks. I do kind of worry at looking at this chart because I think that Asgarnia as a first area is still maybe a little bit challenging. The skill spread isn't quite good enough, and some of these tasks, a lot of them end up being related to like God Wars or Slayer. I think Asgarnia probably slots in better as a second area. You can take it first. I think you'll still have enough to be able to open up your next area, but I think in terms of speed, this probably isn't the fastest to take as your first choice, just because you've got God Wars, and God Wars is pretty time consuming, especially if you want to get all of the gear. A lot of folks, including myself, have been dry at 1 or 2, or, you know, worst case, all of these bosses, and even though it is faster to kill them in leagues, you're not going to be killing them that fast in the early and mid game. Like once you get to late game, sure, but even still, 500 kills on each of these bosses, that's 2,000 kills at God Wars. At a minute a kill, that's still 2,000 minutes, man. I mean, it is not that fast. A lot of people have taken Asgarnia. They know what I'm talking about. This can definitely burn people out. Now, it's a different story if you only care about one of them or two of them, just because even if you do go dry, getting 500 kills at one of these bosses isn't that bad. But do just bear that in mind. I think God Wars and next even, like, the time commitment for this tends to be pretty up there. There are also quite a few skilling outfits that you're probably going to want to pick up for the points, and they're not necessarily that useful or fun to do. So like the mining outfit, Motherlode Mine, you can do Motherlode Mine, but you probably end up wanting to do like other things during the league. And historically, it hasn't really benefited much from relics. So it's made getting the outfit a little bit slow. And it's kind of similar with like the graceful outfit. It's a lot of rooftop laps, man. It's not the most fun. So I am putting Asgarnia top of A, knocking Desert down one. I think it's a little bit better than the Desert just because the gear spread is so good. It starts to feel a little bit worse, I think, in the tasks. Kind of time consuming, especially for the God Wars stuff. If you aren't a big fan of that, it is really difficult to take Asgarnia, and because like so many of the tasks end up being related to God Wars. And I also don't think the skilling spread is the strongest. So all of that together, top of A tier. I think it's still an extremely solid region. It just can't quite get to S tier for me. Moving on to some more trash regions. Kandarin. Oh man, Kandarin. What can I say? The gear spread, not that good. It is definitely the best for magic. It does definitely have some good pieces for melee. Kind of sucks for range, but like the overall gear spread for this place, it is definitely support region. All right, everybody knows this is a support region. You're not taking it for like your main setup. It's not necessarily a problem to have a support region because you don't always want to have 3 regions that you're spending a lot of time grinding bosses on. So don't take my pessimism as Kandarin is like super trash. I personally don't like it, but it does definitely have its use cases. If you're doing a magic build, you almost always have to take Kandarin unless they do something crazy with the echo bosses. It does also have the ability to charge Dragonstone jewelry, which depending on what sort of teleport options you have, that can be a good benefit for you. And even though it lacks a lot in the gear side of things, it does have pretty good skilling support. So you are picking up the Monkey Madness 2 tunnels. If you have the ability to like barrage, it's really good for magic. You are going to be picking up red chin, so you're going to be able to chin in the tunnels. Really good for range, defense, HP. You've got the fishing guild. You've got barbarian fishing. They come with a plethora of options. You've got like fishing trawler as well in that mix. So fishing and cooking, eating pretty good in this region. Got Arty Knights for thieving. You got this fletching shop in the ranging guild. All of this stuff, I mean, it's all good things. It just doesn't have a lot in the way of gear. But for what it lacks in gear, also the tasks are pretty good. It's a good early region, good mid-game region, kind of similar to the Wild in that regard, where a lot of the tasks end up being pretty easy to complete. So you're able to blitz through this region and then just be done with it. You get all your gear upgrades, you finish up the task, you're good to go. Now, while I don't personally like Kandarin, I actually think it's okay. It's not quite as good as something like the Wilderness for me. I think the Wilderness supplies just help out skills a lot better than what Kandarin can do, but it is still all right, and it does still have its certain use cases, particularly with magic builds. So I'm putting it top of C. I do think it is a little bit better than the Fremennik region. So Kandarin, that's as nice as I can be to you. Oh man, Tirannwn. Trash regions? Did I say trash regions yet? Look at that gear, man. You're picking this for the Bofa. That's all you're really getting. You get a couple of pieces for melee. You get the divine pots. It's nice. You do have to take Tirannwn if you want the maximum POH pool, but you can't just get that with Tirannwn. You're gonna have to pick up either the Fremennik region or Varlamore to get access to a stonemason shop. A little bit unfortunate. You know, if Prifddinas had a stonemason, this would actually be a really nice benefit for Tirannwn, but because it doesn't, like as a standalone region, it kind of sucks. You only get the Bofa, man. And I mean, even on the skilling side, I mean, you've got Zora, who drops a lot of supplies, sure. So it definitely can help out some skills. You've got like pickpocketing, elves, Volcano, red chins. I just don't think it's enough. And like the tasks are heavily weighted towards the end of the game. So taking it as a first region, unless again, they have like a shop relic, you're gonna struggle, dude. Do not take this first. I'm not even sure I would take this second. I'm probably looking at Tirannwn third. Second, third, somewhere in there. I mean, sure. If your heart is attached to the Elven City, by all means. It is D tier. It is bottom of the pile. I don't think you get much worse than Tirannwn. I know there's people out there who like it. I'm sorry, Tirannwn lovers. I think it's the worst region. Now, Moving on to like probably one of the better, if not the best regions in the game, Kourend. While it doesn't have a lot of early and mid-game gear, you can pick up the Shazian armor, particularly good for range, but you can use it for melee, fill in some slots. You've also got the salad robes if you want to do that for mage. It at least gives you some option there. You got the Tome of Fire. I can say things right sometimes. And then, of course, you've got the raid offering you just a ton of best in slot unique stuff. You get the 2 prayers. You've got best in slot, just mage all around. You get your full mage setup just going Kourend. Range, you get some good weapons, good shields, got that prayer. Melee, you are mostly getting special related weapons, so it's definitely the weakest, but you do also get the door. Sometimes there's like some fun Dins builds. You take this, you take Morytania, and just get super tanky. Plus, you are getting the Arceus spellbook, which has some pretty good skilling options and some pretty good combat options as well. This is like, maybe because it's like the newest spellbook, but this thing is like really good because you get thralls and you also have like ensouled heads. I promise I can say things right sometimes. Don't ask me about runes though. But you've got that great prayer option. It also has some good supporting things where like farming, herb lore, hunting. So all around, really, really solid spellbook. And frankly, you can train pretty much everything in this area. The only thing that I don't think is particularly good in this area is agility, but like, who cares? you have Brimhaven already in the starting area. So like, you get the woodcutting guild, you get the farming guild, you've got Kourend for like her slayer, as well as the brimstone keys for the chests, for supplies. You got AFK at like sand crabs all over the place. You get Winter Todd. The Winter Todd supply crates. Oh, the Winter Todd supply crates give you so many supplies, dude. Kourend, you got everything. I love you. You're great. Even the tasks, dude. This can be a good like early, middle, and late region. It's got it all. It's literally got everything. Just pick Kourend. I'm gonna save you the time. Pick Kourend. It's there. It's S tier. The only thing you're gonna spend a lot of time on is Chambers of Xeric. You're probably gonna be there for the raid gear anyway. It's great. It's the best. It's literally the best region. It's actually the best region. All right, Varlamore, last one. Wow, this is going through all of these for the tier list, taking quite a lot of time. Thanks for sticking it out this far. Varlamore is a bit of an interesting one. It kind of lacks the early game mage gear, but that isn't really a problem because you're not really using mage when you're in Varlamore. The bosses are all very melee focused. And then it's also got like a decent early mid-game range setup, early mid-game melee setup as well. And then when you transition into the Moon's armors, there's definitely some interesting things that you can do with these. I know the Blood Moon is one that I have been hyping up a lot. I think this has the best potential of being good with some of the relics. The ranged and the mage effect on the Moon's armors, I'm a little bit up in the air for. It's really gonna depend on what the relics are. But even that said, I mean, generally speaking, the gear in this region is probably good enough to just carry you through the entire game if you wanted to, especially if you don't want to be tied down to something like a raid, which tends to be way more time consuming. You just go through and get the Moon's armor. I think you'll be set. You'll be pretty happy just going and doing any boss. And you also aren't really needing to combine it with anything. Like, this is a fairly self-sufficient region as well. Salamander, I'm hoping, I'm praying, man. If this can be good, I'm gonna love it. Skill-wise, it is not the best spread for the skills, but it does definitely get some benefit for some of the production skills because you have Hunter Rumors, which the Hunter Rumor packs, I mean, they just drop like a lot of logs, a lot of herbs, a lot of stuff that you can cook or turn into the bone shards for prayer. Plus, you've got essentially like AFK thieving, good hunter training methods. You've got the bone shards as well for like prayer, Gilded Altar if you don't want to do that, Sunfire Ruins if you want to do that one, even like Calcified Rocks. I know several of you guys pointed that one out in the Varlamore video. Not necessarily like the best mining experience, but that is an okay way to mine. Also give you more bone shards, help out with your prayer. So Varlamore is an interesting one where I think it's like a good all-around region. You definitely aren't going to pick it up for a lot of like best in slot stuff, but it can definitely help you with things. Now for the task distribution, since we don't know what the tasks looked like last year, this is just me kind of taking a guess based off the activities in the area. I'm expecting that we'll spend most of our time in the early to mid game. There are going to be a handful of those late game tasks for things like Colosseum or Bardorvis, but a lot of them are going to be concentrated towards like the mid game. So I think Varlamore is going to function really well as like a first or second pick if it's a region that you end up wanting to grab. Given everything that Varlamore has to offer, I struggle to put it too much higher, and I may catch a little bit of flack for this. I'm just dropping it onto the end of A. I think it's got enough there that it kind of brings it above maybe like that average, you know, the B B tier, whatever. I do think it's better than that, but it does struggle to compete with something like Asgarnia in the desert just because the gear, it's unknown. The Varlamore gear can be good, but it may not be good. It just is going to depend a lot on how the relics interact with it. So we'll have to see. I will be revisiting this tier list as they leak information. So make sure if you want to see like a more updated playlist, every time I do a leak, I'm going to be revisiting this and kind of talking about how it shifts things around. Now, one thing that a couple of folks were asking me about is how does my tier list compare to Skritic and Double Shines? This is more for fun. And I find it interesting actually that our top 4 and our bottom 4 are the same. And we ended up putting Varlamore in the middle as well. So not that different. I value the wilderness a little bit more than I value the Fremennik region. And I value Morytania a little bit more than the desert. So that's where we ended up flipping, but actually ended up being way more similar than I would have thought. But that is it. Oh my God, man, I've been talking for a long time. If you have listened to this entire thing, thanks for sticking around. I appreciate it. Trooper, man. So again, subscribe if you want to see more Leagues content. I'm going to be revisiting this tier list and using this as a reference point as we get more information. I've got my Discord linked in the description down below. So if you want to join that, that's available to you. I will be streaming the start of the league. It's going to start on the 27th. We don't technically know the start time, but as many of you have pointed out, historically it started at 6 a.m. Central. I am not that much of a morning person, so if it starts that early, I'm still starting at 9 o'clock. We can talk strats. I'll be getting into the league. If some of you started really early in the morning, maybe you can give me some advice, see where we end up. But with that, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.